Hi, I'm Mona Lisa Behra, curator at Artistic, and I'm going to take you through the 10 lots we have in this auction. Before we begin, a little background on Raja Ravi Varma, a pioneering artist who was ahead of his time. Raja Ravi Varma, when he opened his printing press in 1894, owing to a huge demand for his paintings, little did he know that he's leaving behind a legacy of unforgettable and iconic images that will remain etched in our psyches for years to come. We start with the first lot, which is Vasantika. Vasantika was created as a part of a series featuring Padmini, Varini, and Vasantika. All the three are supposed to be Apsaras or celestial nymphs. Now, Vasantika comes from the root word Vasant or spring. So, Vasantika is supposed to be the harbinger of spring, the incoming of spring. And here you will see her imagery signifies the effect of spring. There are flowers, and she's standing amidst a lush jungle, and she's dressed in pink in a translucent and a wispy sari that just flies away with the wind. So her Apsara avatar being intact, being the seductress, being the beautiful nymph who remains eternally youthful, we have this Apsara who ushers in the spring. Moving on to the second lot is Chitralekha, an iconic painting by Raja Ravi Varma, which features a painter and her friend. So this is supposed to be one of the first paintings of a painter. And here the protagonist is the woman in yellow sari who's seated on a settee or a sofa, but the painting is named after the painter, the woman who's seated at her feet, the Chitralekha, the one who's making images. So what happens is the woman in yellow is Usha, a famous princess. Her story comes from Mahabharata. So Usha one day dreams about this very good looking prince and she immediately falls in love with him. But she is unable to identify who is this man, and the next day she goes to her friend who's a painter and asks for her help. Her friend, the Chitralekha, starts creating portraits of various princes she knows. And if you'll see, right next to Chitralekha, we have three portraits. So she has already made three portraits and she makes another one of a prince called Anirudh. Anirudh is the grandson of Lord Krishna. The moment Usha looks at Anirudh's portrait, she gasps in surprise and she recognizes that this is the man of her dreams. So this is the scene when Usha recognizes the love of her life and Chitralekha helps her to find him. Coming to the third lot we have here is Damti Samvad, or the conversation between the swan and Damayanti. Damayanti was an important character in Mahabharata and the Kavya Nal Damayanti, an epic love story. So Damayanti was this famous Nayika of Raja Ravi Varma who was a subject of many of his works, most famously being the painting called Hansa Damayanti, where we see Damayanti keenly listening to the swan. Now the scene that we have right in front of us is a continuation of that scene, where we have Damayanti passing on a message for Nal, her lover, via this divine swan, the swan having ability to talk to humans. And why this lithograph becomes so important is A, the original painting is hard to trace, and secondly, the composition has drastically changed. What you see in Hansa Damayanti and now what you see in Hansa Damayanti Samvad, the continuation, is entirely different. Damayanti looks different. Damayanti is dressed differently. Her sari is draped in a very different way. The landscape behind her has changed. And most importantly, even the swan looks different because it has this golden plume on its head. So the painting nowhere to be found, and this lithograph being a rare lithograph, so this image becomes all the more important. Coming to the fourth lot, which is called Madhuri, is a curious case and again an extraordinary example of Raja Ravi Varma's genius. So this is reprinted after this famous Raja Ravi Varma painting, Maharashtrian Lady with Fruit. We all know this, and the moment one Googles it, this image appears. But it is not known why he named this lithograph as Madhuri. So some scholars have come up with this explanation that perhaps when he was painting this painting of a Maharashtrian lady with fruit, carrying this platter of fruit, he was imagining the iconography of Madhuri described in Mahabharata. So Madhuri is the second wife of Pandu and the stepmother of Pandavas, the five heroic brothers in the Mahabharata age. So Madhuri was a short-lived character. She dies young, but she was this very powerful woman. She was very important character, and she did a lot before she died. So Madhuri is described in Mahabharata as a woman of slightly dusky complexion, one who is wearing red. So perhaps Raja Ravi Varma was imagining Madhuri when he created this image, which is why maybe he thought to name this lithograph based on that inspiration from Mahabharata, that is Madhuri. Moving to the next lot, this is Ahilya. Ahilya remains one of the most tragic characters in all the epics. But she is also one of the Pancha Kanyas, or one of the five chaste women or five virgins. She is considered a very pious and devout woman and a very chaste character. So what happened was Ahilya was this devoted wife of a Maharishi, of a great saint called Gautam. Gautam was a much older man, always busy in meditation, and Ahilya was his dutiful wife. So one day Indra, while passing, Indra being the god of thunder and the king of gods, he was passing through the clouds and he saw Ahilya, and he was immediately infatuated with her beauty because she was a beautiful woman, and he thought to deceive her in order to be near her. So what happened was he disguised himself as Gautam and came to Ahilya, and thus Ahilya unknowingly committed adultery. When her husband came to know about this, he cursed her to turn into stone. And even after this, what is worth noting is that Ahilya still is considered as one of the most chaste women. Amongst the Panchakanyas, she is at the top, and her reputation, her character in popular imagination remains unsullied. And here, this is what we see in this image. This again is a rare lithograph where we see Ahilya in a slightly playful mode. Her hair is loose, she is wearing white. Yes, the white is not transparent or anything. She's not showing any additional skin or anything, but her posture and the way she directly gazes at the viewer and while playing with her open hair is very unique. There are two more Ahilyas by Raja Ravi Varma where you see Ahilya being portrayed as the married woman. The markers of her marital status are very prominent in those two works. She's dressed in colors which are said to be worn by married women. Her markers like the sindoor um, and her jewelry, everything is very evident of matrimony. And more importantly, her hair is tied and she's seen doing things that is more appropriate for a wife of a great saint. But here we have her, she's standing amidst a forest. The forest is growing wild, and she has a basket of flowers, but she's looking directly at the viewer. She's wearing white, and she's totally in an unseen avatar. And she's not like an Apsara, or she's not a seductress per se, but she is playful. She is a very different Ahilya from what we are supposed to imagine, from what we are supposed to visualize. So this is again a very very rare Raja Ravi Varma Ahilya. Coming to another unusual representation, if we may call it so, is this image of Sharda. So Sharda, if one must know, is another name of goddess Saraswati. Saraswati, who's also regarded as the goddess of music. So if one remembers Saraswati's images, she's dressed in white, she's seated on a lotus, in Padmasan pose, and she holds a veena across her body. So here we have a very different looking Sharda, um, who is seated on a high table. Her legs are spread apart slightly, and she's holding a mandolin. The woman clearly looks from an elite Malabar family, and she's again very bold, and she's looking straight at the viewer. Everything about her is very different from a usual Saraswati that is so carved deep in our psyches. This woman has her hair tied in a top knot, and she's in a very bold avatar. Her sari is slightly transparent, and she's holding um, an instrument which was not really known then, and especially not a mythological character. So here we see a fusion of modernist interpretation with um, iconography uh, adapted from Shastri conventions. So everything about Saraswati is very unique and it's very different. The curtain behind her, that heavy curtain in green, um, the wallpaper, the velvet pillow at her feet, the carpet, and everything is very un-Indian, if you can say so. It's very Western. Only the character that is seated and is staring right at front is Indian. So again, a very, very unusual play on mythological iconography by Raja Ravi Varma. A very rare image. Again, the original painting and its whereabouts are not known. So this becomes a very, very rare image. Coming to another famous Raja Ravi Varma heroines, we have here Shakuntala Sakhi. So Shakuntala with her two friends Anusuya and Priyamvada. What we have here is again a very unusual representation of Shakuntala. So Shakuntala has been a part of Raja Ravi Varma paintings, lithographs, and her story has been told and retold many times. But what is unusual here is we see a young Shakuntala. Shakuntala as a girl, she's not yet adolescent. She's very young, she is very naive, and we don't see her like we see her in the other Raja Ravi Varma images where she has gone through the hardships of her life, or she is looking for something, looking for her husband, or something has happened in her life. Here we see a girl on the cusp of adulthood, and she's dressed in white, that represents her purity, her naivety, her pure mind that is still unsullied, uncorrupted. And we have her friends helping her with her flower garland. She's clearly a young girl and she's clutching at the cloth that covers her breast. And right behind her we have is a deer. So deer in Indian mythology is said to symbolize fickle mind. So it's a clear juxtaposition of a naive Shakuntala and her fickle mind. What happens when she grows up and she starts having desires, she starts having these thoughts, adolescent thoughts, and her life takes turn for the worse. So this is perhaps a sort of a view into the future, but with Shakuntala now being unaware of anything that is going to happen to her. She's young and she's still in a very protected environment. Again, a very, very unusual Shakuntala we have here. Speaking of unusual characters, we have here is Mohini. Mohini was Vishnu's female avatar. So what happened was when the demons took away the pot of nectar or the Amrit, Vishnu transformed himself into this beautiful woman and he came to the demon camp, seduced them and took the pot back to the divine camp. What we have here is this rare and very unusual image is Mohini dressed in a white sari, in a Kerala white sari, and on a swing, while this beautiful landscape behind her plays out. So Mohini was never envisioned, was never designed in this way. So this is all Raja Ravi Varma's own interpretation of a seductress, of a femme fatale. So we have this woman who's all alone, she's on a swing and she's wearing this slightly transparent sari and there's no one to be found near her. So perhaps that's the allure, perhaps that's her seductive charm that the artist tried to show. And another important thing is we again know who's the model for this image. It is the famous Bombay singer that we saw in Ahilya, again modeled for this image as well. So this is a very unusual Mohini which has departed from her conventional or scriptural iconography that we are supposed to see. Now we have reached almost the end. So this is the ninth lot and here we have a marriage proposal. So we have moved away from the solitary single powerful characters to a marriage proposal scene. Who do we have here? We have Arjun and Subhadra, both very important characters from Mahabharata. Arjun being this famous Pandava brother, the greatest archer in the world, this great warrior, and Subhadra was the younger sister of Lord Krishna and Balram. So the scene here happens when Arjun saw Subhadra and immediately fell in love with her. But Balram didn't want Subhadra to marry Arjun. He had other candidates in mind, most famously being Duryodhan, Arjun's cousin, the one who actually exiled the Pandavas. So when Arjun fell in love with Subhadra, so he had to come up with a way to somehow convince Subhadra to marry him. So he disguised as a sadhu, as a hermit, and entered Lord Krishna and Balram's palace. And he abducted Subhadra, took her away deep into jungles. And here we have the scene where Arjun is trying really hard to convince Subhadra to marry him. And we see this reluctant and a very shy Subhadra looking away, possibly thinking about the other candidates who are in line to marry her. And maybe at the end coming to a conclusion that yes, perhaps Arjun is the best amongst the worst and I should marry him. So it is this famous proposal scene, and behind Arjun you will see he has this leopard skin and that dand or that stick or staff that the hermits or sadhus are supposed to carry. So the disguise is complete, and he's somehow convincing Subhadra to marry him. Now we come to the last and the 10th lot, where we have another marriage proposal scene between two epic characters, Madhalsa and Ritudhwaj. So Madhalsa was this highly intellectual, intelligent character in the Indian epics who was also considered a Brahmavadini, a great philosopher whose words always rang true. And she was also very beautiful. One day, what happened was she was abducted by a demon, and this great king, Ritudhwaj, rescued her. So, here is the scene that we see Madhalsa standing next to the tree, and Ritudhwaj, the man standing next to her in a visual turban, entreating her to marry him. So Ritudhwaj is entreating Madhalsa to marry him, and helping Ritudhwaj is his sister, the woman next to Ritudhwaj. So you will see both the brothers and sisters gesticulating and highly anxious and somehow trying their best to convince Madhalsa to marry Ritudhwaj. And Madhalsa, being this fiercely independent, this very intelligent woman, she's taking her own time. She is not looking at either of them. She's thinking. Her hands placed on her cheek indicate that she's pondering over the proposal. Ultimately, she will agree and they will get married. But it is that scene where Ritudhwaj is proposing Madhalsa and Madhalsa is considering the proposal. So these are the 10 lots that are going up in this auction. What we have here are unforgettable stories, fascinating characters, and most importantly, Raja Ravi Varma's genius that comes up where we see such unusual characters presented in even more unusual